Hey everybody, I want to take some time tonight to go through a challenge I did this weekend. It was Chris Mwangi's weekly Sunday challenge at Power Query and M. And the reason I wanted to go through this was when you look at this initially, like a lot of Christmas challenges, it looks really simple. It looks like this is just going to be a straight two-stepper. But he's a really clever dude, and when he does these challenges, he throws a little curveball in oftentimes that make them a good deal more challenging than they look at first glance. And this was one that was like that. And the reason I wanted to spend some time on this tonight is when I was learning Power Query and M, unpivot, I never had a problem with that. But pivoting, I would run into trouble sometimes, and I would get these strange error messages, and I, for a long time, couldn't really figure out why I was getting them. And they're kind of cryptic, and I wanted to show you why you get them and how you fix it. So let's jump into this challenge, and basically all you have to do here is you have these department subnames, and you have to take the text from the left of the delimiter, and that forms the department, and then you use that department as column headers, and then place the body text into the proper columns. So it's basically a pivot. It's creating the headers of a pivot and then pivoting into that. And we'll see it's not quite that simple. So let's jump into Excel, and I've pulled the data in. I've renamed that column subdepartments. Just it was big and unwieldy and just kind of calling out to be typoed. So if we start on this and we go first and we create the department in terms of the left of the delimiter, and we can do that simply by saying text before delimiter, and we just say subdepartments, and we specify what the delimiter is, and we hit OK, and we get our department. And so we can actually change this in the formula to department. Whoop. There we go. Okay. And so what I like to do whenever I work in Power Query and M is I like to take these long step names with spaces and then change those into single names without spaces. Instead of add calls, let's say add department. And the reason I do this is because in the M code, it prevents you from having to use the pound sign quotation marks when you've got spaces and names. And it makes your M code a lot cleaner and easier to handle, and a lot less likely to develop bugs from just typos and missed punctuation. So if we take that now, if we pivot, and what I like to do when I work on these challenges is I use a little utility called pinwin. And that just sits in your tray here. And what it lets you do, it lets you pin windows so that they stay on top. And I like to do that just so I always have in mind what the end goal is. And I can look back at that. And so let's zoom this in a little bit, just to make it easier to see. And what we want to do is we want to pivot this column. And if we go to transform and pivot column, and then we go to advanced option. I'm not really sure why they call this advanced option. It's basically just a straight up option you have for pretty much every time you pivot. And the other thing that's weird about this is don't aggregate should probably be the default, since at least for me, I use that 10 times more than any of the other aggregation options. And so if we click OK here, we're going to get an error. And it's an error that is pretty cryptic. It said there are too many elements in the enumeration to complete the operation. And what this means is when you pivot, and let's change this name just to pivot. When you pivot, it only asks for two things. It asks for you to click on the column you want to pivot into from rows into columns, and then it asks you for the cell contents that when you pivot is going to fill these these columns. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't ask you for a column that guides which rows the data go into. And so the pivot will tell you what columns they go into, but it doesn't tell you what rows they go into. And so there's a third column you need that guides the rows. And you can see here the only one that didn't return an error was one where there was only one. So it knew what row that went into. It went into row 1. But here, it doesn't know whether this should go into row 1 or row 2 and row 2 or row 1. So what we can do is we're going to have to create a column. And this is where, I say Crispo does this a lot, where he sets it up so that you don't have exactly what you need. And the way we can fix this in a whole number of ways, which is always true of M code, that there's always multiple ways to do things. And the first thing we can do is we can take and group on this department. And we can just do a simple all here, and then all rows. And let's just move this window down out of the way a little bit. And so if we click on this, then what we've got, let's change this to group. And if we look in here at our table, what we've got is basically the reproduction of the table we had, department and subdepartment. And what we want to do is we want to add to each of these the number of rows in the table. And so we can do that by going add column, custom column, and then this is going to be add index column. And we're going to add that, instead of adding that to the whole table, we're going to add that to the nested table, the all, and we're just going to call that index. And we're going to close off the paren. And we'll see here what we've got now is we've got subdepartment, department, and for each of these we've got a counter that counts 0, through 0, 1, 2. So in this case it's going to be just 0 and then 0, 1, 2, 3 for 4 rows. We could have set that to start at 1. It doesn't really matter. So what we can do now is we take and we can delete the other columns because we've got everything we need in this column. So we remove other columns, and then we can expand that. And now what we've got is exactly what we need. That if we pivot this index now tells, okay, that this goes in row 0, this goes in row 1, this is in 0, this is 1, this is 2, this one just is in a row by, is the only one in the row, and so forth. And so if we go here now and pivot, transform, pivot as before, and then we click the advanced options and say don't aggregate, and we pivot, and then we just take out that index column, we get exactly what we want. And that's definitely one way to solve it. That's probably the way I would do it most frequently. But let's take a look. There are 2 other ways that are kind of obvious to me that we can do it. I'm sure there are more. But let's go to the group step. And then let's delete from that point. Let's delete from that point down. And I'll show you another way to do this that's requires a little more knowledge of M, but is very quick and straightforward. And I want to highlight a post I did a while back, which was a post on M Code Basics, and it was 10 ways to disassemble a table. And move this out of the way again. And what this what this does is it goes through and shows you all the different functions that you can use to break a table down into its component parts. And so the one that we're going to use here is going to be table to columns. And what this does is produce a nested list of lists. And I'll show you why that's handy. Because if we go back into Excel and we go to our group stage, so we add department and then we group by, and we go all and all rows, that what we've got, if you look at it, is in this table we've got everything we need. We've got the column headers that we want to pivot into, and we've got the component cell contents. And so what we can do here is we can take, and with this table, what we want is, we don't need the duplication of the department because we've already got the department. So we can simplify this expression by just taking all this out. This is just kind of extra code. And you can see here that if we take that out, we still get the same thing. And then what we can do here is, instead of each underscore, an underscore just says, give me the whole table for each one. We can say, just give me the subdepartment, which is the list that we want. And if we watch the table below, when we hit return, it'll go from a nest of tables, nested tables, to nested lists. And nested lists is what we want, because then what we can do is we can add another step here, and let's change this to group. And in this next step, what we're going to do is we're going to use table from columns. And what this asks for, it asks for a list of lists, which is going to be group all, because all is our list of lists. And then it's going to ask for the column names, which is going to be group and then department, which is our list of column headers. And we click close paren, we click return, and that gives us our final result that we want down here. Okay, so there's a third way I want to show you, and what we can do is we can take and we can duplicate from our last result, and basically just take out the last two steps. So that we've got the department added. And then what if we add the index now instead of adding from the nested column? So let's go and let's add columns, and let's add that index column. And we've got that 0 through 1. But in this case, we don't have it by department. We've got it for the whole table. And so let's see what happens when we pivot this. And we go transform, pivot, and we're not going to get an error because we've now got this index column that tells it which row to put everything in. But each of the rows is unique. So what we're going to get is we're going to get this. We're going to get 10 rows. And this isn't bad. This isn't bad because what we've got now is we've got everything in the proper column. We just have these nulls that we have to take out. So what we can do is we can split this table into columns again and then operate on each column to take the nulls out. And so what we can do is we can take this, let's take this index column out because we don't need it. It served its purpose as the guide for which row to go in. So now what we can do is let's go into the advanced editor, and I'll show you a trick I really like. And this is, we're gonna We're going to code this one free code. And let me just blow this up a little. Okay. And so what we've got now is we're going to add a step, and we're going to say we'll call this answer. And what we're going to do here is we're going to just put an open bracket, which is the record operator. And this is going to mean we're going to have kind of sub-steps in here. This is the equivalent of putting a nested let expression in. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to have multiple steps. And the first step is we're just going to take that previous column, that rem calls, and we're going to split that into columns. So we're going to use our table to columns and then rem calls. Okay, and so the next thing we want to do is we want to have a second step that operates on that list of lists. So for each column in the table, we're going to operate on it, and we're going to say list.transform, and it's going to ask for the list as the list. So that's A is going to be our list, and then transform is a function. So we're going to say list remove nulls. Okay, and now what we want to do is we've got a list that's transformed, and now we just want to put that list back into a table. So we're going to say table from columns, and we're going to take our list as B, and then we've got column names. It says columns as any, and that's going to be the list of column names. And we know what that is, which is the column names. So table column names column names of our previous table, rem calls. And so if we close that off and we keep the record operator open, let's just delete these extra, and we close that off, we delete the rows, and then we just we change this to answer so that it returns the final answer. And what we're going to see is we're going to see a record, and in that record we've got a list, a nested list. We've got another nested list. So this is our original list. We went to columns. This was the transformed list. And this is the table that we got. And we can see that this is exactly what we want. This matches our final answer. And so what we can do is if we go back into the advanced editor, we can just specify, instead of keeping that record open, what we can do is have it return field C, which is our table. And we click on that, and we get our final answer, which is exactly what we wanted. And so this may seem a bit more complicated, and it is. But the thing I wanted to show you was that open record, because that is a great way to debug and to create code as you go and be able to check each step individually. And then when you've got it right, you can just pull the field out of the record that you need. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that's given you a sense not only of why pivots blow up, but what you can do to fix them. And it's hopefully kind of giving you a path into looking at M code through that table disassembly set. And I hope you find that helpful, that I find M code to be one of the most valuable things you can learn. It's incredible for data cleaning, for setting up your data model, for even doing a fair amount of analysis. So I hope you found that helpful. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next